calls for symmetry and how it's the same on both sides, but at the same time, you are making references to Israel being an apartheid state and these other things that have happened, like in the U.S. and South Africa. So you're calling for symmetry between those two as well. From what I've seen,
can you repeat? I don't understand.
So you are calling for symmetry between.
I'm not calling for symmetry. I'm saying there's no symmetry.
But you're calling Israel an apartheid state, correct?
Okay.
Okay. And South Africa was also apartheid.
Yes.
Okay. So in a sense, you're making a relation.
Equating. You think I'm equating between the two?
Well, it's the same word. So in a sense, there's a symmetry between the two words, and there's something associated with that word. Correct.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to continue. So,
okay. Maybe I'll understand it later.
Okay. So there's an association between the word apartheid. Correct. So there's.
Okay.
Okay. So when Israel is the only state in the Middle East that allows for women's rights, okay, black rights, gay rights, all these, so you cannot necessarily have this symmetry between these completely different cases. So that's my first point. The second point is more of a student perspective, as from what I've seen as a student center on this campus. So you see that the BDS movement calls for peace, correct? So it calls for peace where when BDS, when the divestment bill is presented to Senate, it creates a hostile environment within the Senate and within the students. And I've experienced it firsthand. I have been bombarded with thousands of emails. When UCR rescinded the divestment resolution last year, I got 2,000 emails spamming me. And I don't think this necessarily shows peace.
Okay.
Clarify, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I would actually like to know if there's any other students in the audience who would like to have a say. It is, after all, your program and your class. So just before we have any more non-students speak, are there any students who would like to come forward, make a comment, ask a question, and thank you for your
Sure, it's a public university. It's not only students, but taxpayers.
I totally understand that students are an important part of that constituency, and I would like them not to be shy of coming up and asking questions. So let me just ask that.
David, do you mind?
Go ahead.
I'd like to respond. And students, when we have, Mr. Barghouti is a political activist, and what a political activist does is use emotionally loaded terms and shape the scholarship to suit their purposes, to arouse righteous indignation, and hopefully to create action. And Mr. Barghouti has done this over and over and over again today. He has said, for example, Pape is the only historian he's the authoritative historian. And even Benny Morris agrees with Pape. Students, I think, go and read. Go and read, evaluate the evidence, and see whether Benny Morris and other historians really agree with the so-called authoritative Pape. Over and over again today we have seen a distortion, emotionally loaded terms, colonialism, racism, apartheid, ethnic cleansing. And of course we're all going to live together in peace after there's justice. When we see these emotionally loaded terms used over and over again, can we really be, how confident can we be that there will be this peace?
This will need to be the last round of questions since we have to be finished.
Well, I'm a
If anybody else does want to ask a question, please move to one of them.
Although I'm not a registered student here, I'm a faculty member, and I'm still a student of life, and I'd like to say that I very much appreciate the opportunity to listen to your viewpoint. And I'm just curious, operationally, how you think the right of return could work in the context of a two-state solution, given the establishment of so many generations of people now. How is this going to be solved, practically speaking? Thank you.
The first question, two parts. How is Israel an apartheid state when it has the only country that gives women's rights in the region, gay rights, and so on and so forth? And the second was about divestment. If we seek peace, then how come divestment resolutions cause a lot of controversy? And 2,000 emails to a particular student senate. Well, the first part, maybe you missed that part of my presentation. Did you come late? Maybe. Because I answered that very, very specifically and at length, not in passing. It does not matter what rights Israel gives or does not give. It did not matter what South Africa gave in terms of rights or did not give. Specific rights. So long as the UN definition of apartheid applies, it's an apartheid state. So long as you have one group oppressed systematically, denying another group, institutionally, legally denying them equal rights, that's apartheid. So don't we have racism in the US? I often face that question, which connects to that. And France, and Britain, and so on. Why is Israel an apartheid and the US is not? Well, the US was an apartheid state. I mean, the civil rights movement was fighting apartheid. We just did not call it that, because apartheid became defined in 1973. But having two kinds of laws, two systems of law, one applying to whites, one to non-whites, that's apartheid. That's exactly apartheid. Because when it's institutionalized and legalized. South Africa had better gay rights than all of the African continent put together. That did not exonerate it from being accused of being an apartheid state, because it had laws that discriminate between whites, blacks, and coloreds. That is the problem. That's how we define apartheid. It's not a loaded term, it's a legal term. Yes, legal terms may inconvenience some of you who are not used to listening to them in the context of Israel, but you know, you got to live with that. The best thing to get rid of that is for Israel to stop doing that, and then we don't use those terms. Then we can say that Israel is a nice and dandy, fine and dandy country. But so long as it practices apartheid, I'm sorry, I'm not going to sanitize the language and censor myself and say, oh, it's performing some egregious acts without mentioning the term apartheid, because that's the term used to describe that. Many Israeli leaders have used the term apartheid. I have tons of documentation on that, including Attorney General Michael Ben Yair, for example. Not just Shulamit Aloni, who was the Minister of Education. Many Israeli leaders have used the term apartheid to describe part or all of Israel's policy. A poll for the Israeli public found out that more than 50% did not object to describing their country as an apartheid state. It raised a lot of hell in the Israeli mainstream media when the results came out, and I'll be happy to share every single claim I mentioned here. So Jimmy Carter, the former president, called Israel in the occupied territories practicing apartheid. Eminent international law experts, from John Dugard to Richard Folk, who happens to be Jewish, to many others, have called Israel's policies as amounting to apartheid. So that it's not a loaded term, it's just the reality. The second part about divestment causing controversy. Allow me to continue, because I have three...
I didn't say controversy, I said hostility.
Hostility, okay. That BDS seeks peace, so how come it creates a hostile environment when you have BDS resolutions? You're too young to know how hostile the environment was in the South Africa divestment movement. I can tell you, because I was active on the margins of that movement. As a foreign student, I couldn't be in the forefront of the demonstrations. When the New York police used to storm our campus, Columbia University, I couldn't be caught in the front lines because I would be deported. But it was extremely hostile. The administration used tactics that were extremely hostile. Students who supported white supremacy, were opposed to ending apartheid in South Africa, were extremely hostile. But causes, struggles for justice may cause controversy, even a bit of a hostility, but it's certainly better than maintaining silence and complicity on a system of injustice to continue. So we might tolerate some slightly uncivil behavior, if you will, as long as it doesn't develop into violence, which we completely condemn, We cannot tolerate any kind of violent confrontation. I personally oppose any kind of ad hominem attacks, personal attacks. I can attack your argument, but not you. I can say your statement is false, but not you're a liar. There's a huge difference. And we have to be very civil in such debates to maintain that atmosphere. I agree with you, the debate has to be more civil, but I wouldn't shut down the debate just because it's slightly uncivil, because it's about a very important cause for justice. I was described as a political activist. I'm not. I'm not a politician at all. I'm a human rights activist.
Right.
Huge difference. I do not want to rouse the masses. I want to reveal the facts that have been hidden so well behind huge walls of silence and complicity and fabrications in your mainstream media. So allow me to reach out with facts. And if anyone, as I said, this is the fourth time I make this offer, anyone would like to get reference on any claim I've made during this presentation, you're more than welcome to ask, and I'll send it to you. Ilan Pape and Benny Morris, again, you twist what I say and you try to reach your own conclusion. I did not say Ilan Pape was the only authority. I said he's certainly a prominent authority. And I did not say Benny Morris agrees with Ilan Pape. I said Benny Morris agrees with Ilan Pape on the Plan Dalet fact. No Israeli historian disputes the fact that Ben-Gurion and Zionist leaders had a Plan Dalet for ethnically cleansing Palestine well before the partition plan. That is not disputed. That's where Benny Morris agrees with Ilan Pape. They disagree on many other issues. They agree on many issues, but they certainly don't see eye to eye on many. How the right of return would be operationally enacted. Again, I'm not a politician. I wouldn't even know how exactly, but I've written about my own personal vision for an ethical implementation of the right of return, and I'll be happy to share the source with you at the end. In a nutshell, the main ethical principle for me is two ethical principles. First is people have a right to return regardless. Any political inconvenience should be put aside because people have a right. Jewish refugees of World War II had the right to return. Many of them exercised the right to return to Germany. Jewish Sephardic Federation, Jews of Spain, original in Spain, after 500 years of being expelled from Spain, fought and won the right to return to Spain and to regain their nationality in Spain and to regain pillaged property. So we're learning a lot of lessons from the World Sephardic Federation. 500 years of being expelled. So people tell us, oh, 65 years, 66 years of being expelled from Palestine, why don't you just let go and move on? How can we? That 69% of our people are refugees or internally displaced persons. So the first is the rights. People have a right that has to be recognized. The second is that in enacting, in operationalizing the exercise of that right, every effort, and I've published that, has to be made to limit to an absolute minimum any unnecessary victimization of the current occupants of Palestinian lands and houses that were ethnically cleansed. And I can get into a lot of detail. I developed a whole scheme that I'll be happy to share with you. But those are the two principles, and I'll leave it at that. There are many studies about how to implement this. I'll mention one, Dr. Salman Abu Sitte, a Palestinian researcher who's an expert on the right of return, published a work about 6-7 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, that said that more than 80% of the lands from which Palestinians were ethnically cleansed, about 500 villages were systematically destroyed, bulldozed, are still empty in the state of Israel today. More than 80%. So the argument is, to him, in more than 80% of the cases, Palestinians can go back and reestablish their communities, their villages, their livelihoods, without having anyone be evicted from their homes. And you'll still have a good substantial 10 to 20% that you have to deal with in the most ethical and legal way possible.
Thank you, Omar. I just want to say, apart from, once again, thank you, Omar, that if anybody is interested in hearing this conversation continued in a slightly different context at a student-organized meeting, there is, from 6 to 8 p.m., Omar Barghouti will be appearing with Professor Fred Moten of UCR and with Professor Rosario Sanchez from UC San Diego. This event is sponsored by Students for Justice in Palestine and with MECHA, the Mexican-American organization. It's in INTS 1113 across the way in the interdisciplinary building. So that's 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. 1113 INTS. Thank you all very much for being here.